Okay, in honor of today being Halloween, we are going to make a spooky animation in Blender. And I will leave a link to download this blend file in the description so that all of this will be set up just like I have it here. The first thing I want to do is I want to be able to look around my scene with my camera, but I don't necessarily want to keyframe the rotation of the camera. I want to use this object over here to control what my camera is looking at. So what I will do is grab the camera, go to our object constraint panel, and we're going to add a track to constraint. If you set the target object to this empty here, that's going to keep our camera locked on this empty. So wherever we remove this, that is where the camera is going to be looking, which is just super helpful because we can just animate this empty and then the camera will follow since we have that constraint on it. And I've also locked the y-axis for this empty, so it's not going to be able to move towards the camera like that, which is helpful. I feel like in every spooky house, there is a chandelier that has flickering candles and it is rocking back and forth. And if I hit play, you'll see right now we do have some flickering candles or flickering lights. But I want to make these things swing. So I'm going to isolate one. I'm just going to hit the / key and I'll turn on screencast key so you can see what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do is go to frame 1, which the shortcut for that is shift and left arrow. And I'm just going to rotate it about 20 degrees like that and set a keyframe for the rotation. If you twirl down the object transforms right here, you'll see it added 3 keyframes for the rotation. And since we didn't rotate it on the Z or the X axis, we just rotated it on the Y axis, we can click these and hit X to delete them because we just need that Y axis data. So you see if you zoom in, there's a little point right here where we logged that information. I want to duplicate that and create a cycle so it just goes back and forth. So if I select this, hit Shift D and then move it to frame 100. So if I type 100, it's going to move it 100 frames from frame 1. So it'll technically be 101. So we've got 2 keyframes for when the chandelier is at this rotation, but we want to have one where the chandelier is at this rotation and then alternate between them. So if I rotate it like this, add a keyframe, then we have it here and it swings over and it swings back. What I want to do is for this to repeat over and over and over again without me having to set a bunch of keyframes. So if I just click one of the keyframes on this Y, this green line here, I should see a menu pop up over here where I can add a modifier. I'm going to pick the cycles modifier. And that is going to repeat the keyframes. The reason we had to add the 3rd keyframe here is because the first and the last keyframes of the cycle have to be the exact same for the cycle to work properly. So if we hit play on that, it is working perfectly. I do want to make a slight change to the motion though. I don't like how smooth it is. I want it to sort of swing fast and then kind of hang out up here for a little bit and then swing back again and then hang out over here. If you hit Control H, then we get these 2 little handles that are attached to each keyframe. And just try clicking one of them and hitting S to scale. And you'll see that the angle changes. It starts slowing down earlier when you get to the keyframe. And it's more of a dramatic motion. So if I do that for the other 2, it's going to change the look of our curve here, and you'll see how it translates to our animation if I play it. So it's going faster when it swings, and then it's hanging out at the peaks and troughs longer. Sweet. So now we have a swinging chandelier. And if it is too drastic, like I think mine is swinging a bit too much, what you can do is select your 3 keyframes. And if you hit SY, you'll scale it down on the Y axis and the movement will be less exaggerated. And you can kind of play with it as you want. This way is Y and this way is X. For the graph editor here that we're in, there is no Z axis. We want to do the same thing to the chandelier on this side, but it's going to be a lot easier because we can just take the work we did over here and apply it over here. And your first instinct might be to make this a child of that chandelier, but you'll see that that will not work because the chandelier is now rotating on the origin point of this chandelier. So it's rotating like that. Wow, that was a terrible drawing. But it's rotating relevant to the center of this chandelier, which is at that little orange dot right there. When we want it to rotate around its own pivot point, which is right there. So parenting is not going to work for this. So we have to have it not as a child of this chandelier. And the way we're going to get it to do the same swinging motion, there's several ways, but the way we're going to do it today is by adding a copy rotation constraint. So for our target, if you click the eyedropper tool and click our chandelier over here, then it is copying the rotation of the chandelier, but it's allowing it to rotate on its own axis, which is what on its own origin point, which is exactly what we want. Sweet. So I will jump back into my camera and I'm going to grab the empty here and I'm going to point it to the side of the room over here. If you'll see underneath the lid of this container, there's two little dots that I want to use as creepy little eyes that are looking at you. So I want to have the cabinet open and then the eyes will be glowing red and it'll be spooky. So I can go to pretty much any frame that I want to. Select the top of my chest here. Hit K to open the keyframe menu and apply a keyframe for the rotation. Similar to what we did for the chandelier, I'm going to hit Shift D X to duplicate it on the X axis. And then I've got our start and end rotation. So I'll just jump in between. If you don't like the graph editor, you can jump back to the timeline if you want to. If the graph editor scares you, we have our 2 keyframes here, and you'll see there's a line between them because they are the same information. And what we want to do is create the open keyframe. But we can't use any of the global axes in order to do that, which means that we have to switch from global to local, because if we rotate on the local Y of this object, that gets us exactly what we want. So make sure you switch the transform orientation to local. We'll go maybe like 10 frames after the first keyframe here. R and Y to lock the rotation to the Y axis and rotate it up like 10 degrees like that. Hit K, click rotation, and now our line will disappear because our keyframes are different now. If we play it, it's opening really quick and then it slowly closes, which is kind of cool, but I kind of want it to stay open for most of this time. So if I click on this keyframe right here, Shift D and drag it over here, then where this line is, that's going to be the whole time that the box is open, and then these gaps here are where it's opening and closing. So if I play it from the beginning, we get something like that, which works perfect. Now to animate the eyes. You will need to switch to render or material preview node for this. And we're going to be animating some properties in the material settings. So go to the material, and you'll see I put in a color for the emission. I put a bright red color, and we're basically going to switch between 0 and 1, and it's going to look like it's blinking. Make sure you're within the window of time here where it's opening and closing, and if it helps, if you can go to the keyframes where it's opening and closing and hit M, you can set markers there so that when you select your eyeballs, even though the keyframes of the trunk lid are gone, you can still kind of see the area that we're working with here. So we want all of our animation to be in this zone here, otherwise it won't get seen. So I'm going to set one keyframe for 0. A couple frames later, I'll set a keyframe for 1. And I basically want this to go from 0 to 1 in 1 frame. And you can do that by right-clicking, changing the interpolation mode to constant. Now we have the eyes turning on, or opening up. If I duplicate this first frame here with Shift D, I'll bring it to the end, and that's when our eyes will close right before the lid closes. Then the next part, you can just grab these two, Shift D to duplicate them, and just do that for as many blinks as you want. So you could do something that's like that. For me, this is easier to visualize in the graph editor. You'll see right here where all the red lines that are up here is a value of 1, and then every time it's down here, it's a value of 0. You can play around with these to get different variation of blinks, or keep the eyes open for longer if you want. I think I'm going to make my trunk lid open for longer. So all I have to do is just grab these keyframes right here, hit G and X, and I can just drag it along, and I'll move the marker as well. And then we've got more room to play with for our eyes here. Sweet. So we've got the lid opening up, the eyes blinking a couple times, and then the lid closing. If you have trouble sort of navigating the graph editor here, something that helps me is you can zoom in. If you hold Control, just hold that down. 2-finger scroll up or down it'll exaggerate the keyframes vertically, and then a 2-finger scroll left and right will spread them out horizontally. Something that is a very vivid memory from my childhood is the part on the Haunted Mansion ride where there's a door that has like a monster behind it, I assume, and it's like bulging out, like the door is stretching, and you think it's like gonna break, and there's gonna be a monster that jumps out. So I want to recreate that here, and the way we're gonna do that is by using shape keys. In this starter file, for the door on the left here, I have 2 shape keys. I've got the basis, which is the door that's just in its normal door state, like this. And then key 1 is stretched out, like that. Set the value somewhere in the middle, add a keyframe. We'll see it pop up over here. And we can add a noise modifier. And right now, it is way too fast, but if you play with the scale and the strength, you can get something that looks a little better, like that. So a scale of about 9.7 works for me. Strength of 1 also works well, because you'll see when the line approaches this horizontal line here, that's where 1 is a value of 1, and then this line down here is a value of 0. So it's just kind of alternating between those two using a random pattern. What the scale parameter does over here, the scale value, is if you increase that, you're making the noise pattern larger, which means that it's going to take more time to get through it. So the animation happens slower. So it's sort of like background. It's sort of counterintuitive. But yeah, something around 10 I think looks pretty good. And that's one of the easiest ways to animate something, is by using these modifiers here. Another thing I want to talk about is drivers. And a driver is sort of an alternative way of animating that's not using keyframes. It basically uses math. It uses a formula to calculate values for every frame of your animation. And that doesn't make any sense just saying it, but we can do an example and it'll make a lot more sense. So I kind of want these little flower decorations on the wall over here to the right to just spin around in a really unsettling way. So I'm going to grab one, and if we open our side panel here and go to the item tab, we're going to be changing the rotation on the x-axis. And instead of adding a keyframe at frame 1, rotating it a lot, and then adding another keyframe, we're going to add a driver. And the way you do that is by clicking on the value here and typing in hashtag or # frame, and then for every frame it is calculating a new rotation value. Now obviously that is going way too fast, and the way to make it go slower is just by adjusting the equation here. If we hit /20, it's dividing that by 20, and then we get something a lot slower. I think something like 40 works pretty good for this. So just to repeat, we went to our rotation here in our side panel, and we clicked on X rotation, and we typed in hashtag frame so that it's taking account what frame we're on, and we're dividing the speed by 40. And that adds a driver that spins around the flower decoration here. So we'll do the same one for this. That's a little bit too uniform for my taste. It's a little too cute. So if I do divided by -40, it's going to spin the other way. And maybe I'll change it to -30, so that it's a little bit faster. Now that we've done all that, I want to make a little animation. And so now we're going to utilize this empty that we were using in the beginning. Go to frame 1, and we're going to start our animation over here. What I want to happen is we're going to slowly look around the room. You're going to see the door. You're going to see the chandeliers. You're going to see the trunk opening with the eyes glowing. And then when you get over here, we're going to see a little ghost on this side of the room. But we're not going to think that it's a ghost because we're going to look away. And then right when we do a double take, the ghost is going to be gone. So bring this back, and on frame 1 with shift left arrow, we're going to hit K, location, to add a location keyframe for our empty. And then somewhere around here, we're going to add a keyframe looking over here. Now we look back, add a keyframe, and we're going to quickly look to where the ghost was, but he's not going to be there. If you need the whole trunk opening thing to happen sooner, you can just select both the trunk lid and the eyes, grab all the keyframes, and hit GX to move them earlier. And we've only animated this. We've just controlled the keyframes for this object. We haven't animated anything for our camera. By keyframing the location of the empty here, we start by looking left. We see the door, we see the chest, we see the chandelier swinging, we're looking this way, everything is good. We look back, wait, was that a ghost? And then by this point, the ghost is going to be gone. So we have to make the ghost disappear. And we need to be careful about when we do that. And it needs to happen after we get the first look. We look away. We think we're safe. So it needs to happen on this frame, which is 214 for me, but it might be different for you. There's several ways we could do this. We could keyframe the location of the ghost to where one frame he's here, one frame he's out there. We could also change the keyframe for the render visibility. One frame the camera is open, next frame he is no longer visible in the render. But I want to use this moment to discuss another trick that I use a lot, which is another constraint, limit scale. And if you add it to your ghost, you're going to see that nothing is happening because we have not told Blender to limit the scale yet. So what you'll notice if you check all of these maximum values, the ghost will disappear. And that is because we've told Blender, limit the scale of our ghost so that the maximum is 0, which means that it's not visible at all. And what we can do with that is change the influence of the constraint and our ghost will disappear. And you're thinking, why does that matter? Why can't we just keyframe the scale of this object and it does the same thing? And that is because if this was an object that we were already keyframing the scale of, then I think it would just kind of muddy the waters to when you need to scale it to 0 and keyframe the scale of 0 and then bring it back. So I just like using the limit scale constraint. So on 213 for me, the influence of the limit scale constraint is going to be 0, which means that nothing's happening. So we can click a little dot here to add a keyframe. You can also hover over the box and hit I. And then we go to the next frame with right arrow, drag the influence to 1. So we're limiting the scale to 0. Add a keyframe. And then you'll see in a matter of a single frame, we have made our object disappear. And the reason why we wouldn't want to just disable and keyframe disabling it in the render is because even if it's disabled in the render, you can still see it here, which gets a little bit annoying. And also if this had any children that it was carrying with it, even if we clicked this to disable it in the render, all of the children would still be rendered. So if we play our animation, this is what we get. The output properties are all set. All you have to change if you wanted to render this out would be to go to the output file destination here, change the file to wherever you want it on your computer, go to the top, hit render, and render animation. And with that, I wish you all a very happy Halloween.